Hey guys, so welcome to another episode of Talking with Aleesha, a place where I give women who don't usually get a platform to talk. And today, in today's episode, I have someone really special, Carol Rosati, a campaigner for diversity and inclusion. She's created a women's board network, Inspire, in 2008 and won several awards throughout her career and is actually one of the top 100 women to watch. Now, the reason why I really wanted to speak to Carol was because I feel like, especially in today's day and age, diversity and inclusion plays such a big role in our society, in our jobs, in our day-to-day lives. And on top of that, I feel like all, if not most, companies and places can improve their diversity and can do their bit, and I feel like a lot more awareness is really needed on the issue. So hi Carol, thank you so much for being on here today.
Hi.
Thank you so much. And the first question that I just want to ask you is, what made you choose diversity and inclusion? Like, what was the reason why you wanted to pursue it as a career?
I think the easiest way to answer that is it chose me. I used to be a headhunter and I dealt with people for my entire career, and I recruited CFOs and MDs. What I was completely oblivious to was the fact that they were men, all of them. And if I saw more than two female CFOs, I was doing well. But because I'm just me and I just go through life and I go through that way. I hadn't really noticed. I was the only woman at the management team where I was working, and they just treated me as me.
Yeah.
But one day I had an epiphany because I hosted an event and I got up to do the welcoming address, and I looked around the room and I realised that apart from one waitress, there were about 65 blokes looking at me. And I opened that Pandora's box, and from that moment on, I went, well, that's not very fair and equitable.
No.
And that's how Inspire was created.
That's amazing. It's so good that you actually got in those places in the first place, because as a woman, it's hard to be the only one in the room. It's hard to get in that position in the first place. It is really remarkable, and you do have to work hard at it. And for people that, because even me, I promote diversity and inclusion. I did engineering, so I wanted to promote that in the engineering field and things like that. And why do you think it's so important? Because a lot of times people, maybe especially men, don't really understand what's the importance. Like, if someone has the credentials, if someone has the skill, they should be able to get the job. It shouldn't be that serious, or there shouldn't need to be a sector for it, or there shouldn't. So why do you think it's so important?
Well, I guess really, for me, it's all about diversity of thought, because if you get any team, whether it's at exec level or board level or just any team within an organisation, if you've got one type of individual in it, then you're just going to get the same result. Yeah. Every time you have a conversation, there's no innovation.
Yeah.
So in terms of lifeblood for an organisation, I think it's really, really important so that you can reflect your client base more than anything, to have different people talking about it, because I love meeting new people and looking at life through a different prism, through a different lens, and it's stunning that you can just, somebody can say something, and human beings are great when they work together, because somebody can have an idea and then before long it's extrapolated beyond anything that you could possibly imagine, because all the other people have chipped in.
Yeah.
But if you have one kind or set of individuals, you're not going to get that. So
no.
Why wouldn't you?
Yeah, definitely. And I think people forget that actually having your team more racially diverse and gender diverse actually improves the company's profits and improves revenues, as you said. It's because you get different ideas, there's more innovation going on. I think there was a statistic where increases it up to 40%, or a ridiculous number like that I saw online. And it's just amazing how managers and team leaders concentrate so much on so many different things to make more revenue, but don't really concentrate on the diversity sector. They kind of just neglect it. Yeah, the people, like the most important part of it. And it's funny how they don't think that that's actually a big part of what can push a company forward as well.
Well, particularly when you think in terms of your P&L, your wages cost is probably one of the biggest costs on it. So if you don't actually you don't actually make it as rich as possible.
Yes. Yeah, you're actually making a loss, yeah. So I also wanted to ask you, in the UK, so that's where you work, what do you think is the biggest issue with diversity and inclusion?
I think to a certain extent gender fatigue, particularly. When I started Inspire, it was before the Davis Review even. So, you know, we were in dire straits in terms of percentages, wasn't even double figures of women on boards, particularly in the FTSE 100. And we're getting there. We are actually making progress. But there's still so much to do. And we're still talking about a very, very small number of companies when you think in terms of UK-wide.
Yeah.
The number of women on boards is still really, really low. And that's just gender. And for me, I do tend to talk more about inclusion nowadays rather than gender diversity, particularly, although it's a passion of mine, as you can imagine. Because if you think in terms of inclusion, then there's something in it for everyone.
That is true.
Everybody works together and everybody benefits from it.
Yeah.
So for me, that one of the biggest challenges in the UK, or actually globally, it doesn't really matter if it's UK or not, is that people become less selfish and have a basic understanding of what inclusion really means, and accepting that everybody has biases. I mean, you do, they're unconscious. I mean, to a large extent, sometimes they are conscious as well, which is even worse.
Yeah.
But, you know, everybody has unconscious biases because you are a unique individual and a sort of a whole homogenous mix of your own life experiences. So you are unique, therefore. So you've had so many influences on your life that, of course, you'll have a way of thinking about things. And I know I've spoken to you before about privilege bias.
Yeah.
And if you are completely unaware of a particular thing, of course you won't understand it.
Yeah.
And if you're right-handed, you won't understand what it's like to be left-handed in a right-handed world. Simple as that.
Yeah, definitely. It's the thing where we wouldn't have gone, like, for instance, if you weren't a woman, you wouldn't have pursued diversity and inclusion because you wouldn't have noticed that you were the only woman in the room. So it wouldn't have happened because obviously that's why you thought, and that could be for anyone, whether they're disabled or whether they're a different race, or it's because, as you said, they view the world in their eyes, in their perspective. That's why they feel like they're not included, or they're out of it, or they're not part of the team, or they can't get to places where other people might be able to as well.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, at the end of the day, another silly example is I travel on the tube every week, and because I live in Somerset, I have my case with me. And you have no idea how difficult it is to navigate the tube with a case. So it gives you a slight insight into what it must be like to be disabled and using the tube. It is truly awful.
Yeah.
Really, really bad. And yes, I know that they're actually trying to make it different, and they're trying to put lift access into many things. But even if you go from one line to another, bank in particular is the most awful place to actually traverse. So you go to a different line. But most people are just rushing there and getting on to the next line. They don't even think about how difficult it is.
Yeah.
Because
definitely.
that's the nature of life. You don't necessarily always be switched on to other people's point of view. But what I'm trying to do is at least get light bulbs to go on.
Yeah.
So that people can at least think, God, this is really bad.
Yeah, and things should change.
Yeah. Exactly.
I feel like one of the biggest issues with diversity and inclusion is actually getting into the job or into the role or getting promoted. I've read a couple of articles where to get promoted you need to be seen more. It's not just about your work, it's about if you get noticed around the office and stuff like that. And a lot of women particularly are in the office but don't want to be in the highlight kind of thing in people's perspective. That's why they kind of get swept under. And even with the hiring process as well, a lot of times non-white sounding names don't really get called on to the next step and stuff like that. So, and another thing in like engineering, for instance, we talked about it, where there aren't that many women in the higher sectors, and that can be because there's not already women there to hire them, and on top of that, it's such a male dominated environment that they don't feel like they can exceed, or they don't really want to go in there. So I feel like that is a big part. Do you think there's anything in the system or that can change to make the hiring process, or to get people onto jobs or get promoted easier? Like,
well, and you've unearthed well, I could talk all day about that subject, but the for me, I talk about the diversity triangle, because I always think government, business, and the individual all have a responsibility to make it happen. Ultimately, we're all responsible for our own destinies, and we are the only person that can self-limit you is you.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
I think that in terms of, so I'm a coach, and one of the things I do is I run workshops, particularly for women, to empower us, because we are really bad at blowing our own trumpet. We're not very good at putting ourselves forward. We have an absolute distaste for being too showy off.
Yeah, too showy. Yeah.
And would rather be judged on our merit.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the reality is we are still playing on a male playing field, and that kind of behaviour will get you nowhere. We have to learn to be more assertive, not aggressive, but assertive, and certainly proud of and acknowledge what we have done. And there is a process that you can go through to make it more comfortable, because most women do find it very difficult to do it. But so that's one of the things I spend an awful lot of time on, and I'm very passionate about it, because I do believe that we can level the playing field, but we need to learn to do it in a certain way. But in terms of you will be pleased to know, in terms of the government and the organisation bit, the sun's really bright. Yeah. There is a new corporate governance code for the FTSE, a UK governance code, and in there, for the first time, diversity and inclusion is central. And in the guidance notes, they do talk about it's the responsibility of the Remuneration Committee to talk to the HR team within a business to ensure that, for example, the interview panels are more mixed, that women are encouraged to go for less traditional roles, and that they are recognised and identified and helped within an organisation to put themselves forward. So times are changing. We are getting there. We are. That's pushing it.
Yeah.
But it's a slow process, and let's face it, the power is rarely given up easily. Yeah. It's normally taken, and it has to be voluntary from all sides to actually want to make things change.
Yeah, that is true. Yeah, it is. Some of it's what we've been brought up with. Some of it's like there needs to be a change in hierarchy. So there's so many different factors involved.
It's very, very complex.
Yeah, that's the thing. And I think with time, especially mindsets will change as well, and the way of thinking changes progressively with time. Have you seen a difference between diversity and inclusion throughout your career? Like, has it substantially increased, or do you think it's not really improved that much?
Yes and no. The good news is when I first started out in recruitment, people didn't even mention the fact they had a family, and you were men, never mind women, had to lie basically if they wanted to go to the nativity play or a sports day or things to do with their family. You didn't say, I'm going to the nativity play. You would say something, I'm going to the doctors or whatever. Now it's seen as very strange if you don't go. So in that respect, yes, times have changed, which is great. And people are perceived as the whole self coming to work, so their family is an integral part of them, as opposed to a totally separate thing, which is great. But the reality is, in terms of the corporate working life, there's still so far much to go in terms of real change and getting, for example, more women to the top, never mind all the other types of diversity that you might actually want to tick. Because the reality is it's still very, very slow. And I think that you're absolutely right in terms of when we actually finally do get more women or more people from an ethnic background or LGBT individuals who are comfortably out at an organisation and identified and happy to be identified, then we will see, then it'll become normal. Then I won't need to do my job anymore. That's when I would love to be able to say, don't need me anymore. I don't think it's going to happen in my lifetime, but we have made progress. The good news is, yes, we have made a lot of progress, particularly I think in terms of mental health and well-being. Even in the last 18 months, I've seen a huge change in people's attitude, and that really was the last taboo. And it's not seen as shameful anymore.
No, I've seen that.
Thankfully. But again, people are saying the right things, but there's still some really awful practice out there as well. So, and like within the D&I space, people are saying the right things, people are winning awards, but sometimes when you actually look under the surface, you scratch the surface, the culture of the organisation really hasn't changed that much.
Yeah, that's really sad to hear, and I feel like a lot of times companies may be promoting that they're getting diverse or becoming diverse, or they're doing these amazing initiatives, but if you actually look at the statistics and the facts and the actual work that's done, there's not a substantial amount of change.
No.
So it's more of a it's more to get attention and maybe to get the reputation up, or to get involved in diversity as well. Do you work with companies, or do you know outside of the UK how that is with diversity and inclusion, like around Europe or America, or is it just strictly?
It's interesting because when we created Inspire, we started out in the UK. We then went over to the US, then to Hong Kong. Then we came back to Europe for a while and did the Nordics. Then we went out to Vietnam and Singapore, and so we went all over.
There's quite a lot of things.
There's quite a lot, It was really, really interesting to do because, again, scratching the surface and going underneath the cultural reference points for each country, the issues that women faced were very, very similar when you took all that away. Really, really interesting. So, then you get into the whole debate of nature, nurture, and if it's genetic, or if it's hormonal or whatever. But really, ultimately, so fascinating in terms of the very fundamental difference between men and women. Same wherever you go. So, that was the most interesting point for me, I think. And actually doing away with some of the stereotypes that I was, I thought of. But actually many of them were very true when it came to certain countries and how women are perceived. So I think cultural reference points are very, very important, and how you're actually treated as a woman. I think in the UK, the one thing that I found great was that actually we're so far ahead of so many more countries than we thought we were.
Yeah,
so
that's
we're doing
good to
okay.
hear.
We've got a long way to go, but we're doing okay.
Oh, that's good to hear. What were some of the things that shocked you when you went to other countries?
Without telling tales. I think that one of the things that I found really surprising was that West Coast, Silicon Valley, was very male, very misogynistic, and so many of the women were struggling to make themselves heard, to make themselves visible, and to get on. And they didn't lack confidence.
Really? You wouldn't think that, especially because they seem like they're the most progressive, they're the most ahead of time. Yeah, techie, more open as well to new ideas. No,
it was really, really interesting. So more so than New York. So that was a real learning thing for me. But then the likes of Facebook or Twitter or media technology or fintech companies or that sort of techie company have really tried, as they've got bigger, they understand that their client base is predominantly female, and they have really tried to engage with more women, some more successful than others. Mm-hmm. So it is actually really, really interesting that companies that you would think would be easier to work in aren't necessarily.
Yeah, that's really surprising to hear for me as well. Also, talk a bit more about your founding. So Inspire Women, what exactly do you do? Where are you based? And just talk a bit about that, because it sounds really interesting what you guys do.
Well, originally, we found 289 women. That's all we could find to start with. And we wanted to provide a safe, secure environment for women to meet and network. Mm-hmm. Because one of the things that we'd realised, and even more so now, is that in terms of on your task, your list to do day for the day, networking for women is around about number 19 probably. It's over the page and probably on page 4. They'd rather sort of pull their own fingernails out. And we wanted to provide an environment where they could do it comfortably and actually enjoy it. And help each other. And that one of the founding principles for me was no ladder pulling. And by that I mean they had to help each other. Mm-hmm. Because you do get women, or senior women, do have a reputation for having queen bee syndrome, so they don't want other women there. I've only ever met 2 or 3 in my entire career with Inspire. The women of Inspire have been truly amazing in terms of helping each other. And it grew and grew. And I actually left Inspire last year. And by the time I left, it was about 8,000 worldwide. And I am still in contact with so many of the women because I've known them for 10 years. So it's you can imagine it's I've gone up through my career with them, if you like. Mm-hmm. And what it's done, I think, more than anything, is given them a voice, given them somewhere to meet. They like networking, so they've told me anyway now. And what they are, it's inspired them to help the generations of tomorrow.
That's
which I think is one of the most important things.
That's actually amazing. It's amazing how, especially during, because you founded it in 2008 as well. So that was, 10 years ago. So I can imagine there not being that many networking events. Social media wasn't really that prominent then as well. So it must have been really hard, especially for women during that time, especially to get out there and meet like-minded women. And I feel like a lot of times women don't progress is because they don't have that support network. They can't really talk to someone that's been through or going through what they're going through, and and to give advice and stuff like that. So it's very, very amazing what you've done, because even just talking to someone can change your perspective on so many different things, especially if they're experienced as well.
Exactly, and to know that somebody else is going through the same thing.
And you're not the only one, and that is amazing.
And the one again that I used to go to networking events as part of my job, and you could normally sort of count the number of women there because they'd not be wearing black, grey or navy. They'd be wearing something colourful. So, there's a woman. Like butterflies around the room. It's quite funny. And Inspire was just so incredibly different because the way that women network and the way women talk to each other is very different as well. And it's taught me so much about the fundamental differences between men and women. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing, either sex isn't better. They're just different. Of course they are. But it's really, really interesting to see how, for example, women engage and disengage differently from a group. So it's a natural process, whereas in a male networking environment, it tended to be quite awkward and really sort of difficult to get away or to infiltrate a group in the first place. So whereas with Inspire, it was a lot more easy.
Oh, okay.
But several years in, we actually invited guys too, so that they could see how amazing these women were, apart from anything. Only once a year, because we wanted to keep it a safe and secure environment for women. But it was really interesting because the dynamic of the whole event changed when there were guys there, and it was really, really different. The whole feeling of the event was different, And so it was great for me to watch, because it was you think, why is that?
Yeah.
Why all of a sudden is it completely different? And I think when and I always used to keep it so there was 30% men, so that they could actually understand what it felt like to be in a minority. And they there were quite a few light bulb moments going on, which is really quite interesting. And all of them, bar none, A, thanked me for letting them go, and B, said how amazing it was, how enjoyable it was, and how different it was to some of the networking events they've been to. So they even enjoyed it, which is even better.
That's a good thing. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, it's really, really good what you've done. And are there still events going on? Is it still continuing on right now as well? Inspire?
Yeah, I mean, I funny enough, I still have events anyway. It's just not called Inspire because Inspire is with Harvey Nash, where I used to work. But I still have the network, as I call it, because it's at the end of the day, it's the people that I've known for my network that I've known for 10 years.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So many of them contact me and say, "When's the next event, Carol?" So I can't stop whether I want to or not.
Good.
So,
that's good.
And they're senior women in business, so it's great.
Yeah, and what's your take on positive discrimination, meaning that when companies have a quota, they have to have a certain amount? A lot of people, obviously I'm for positive discrimination, but a lot of people are against it. They think that you shouldn't just hire a woman because you need a certain amount of women. They should have the accolades, they should be able to prove themselves. But what's your take on it? On people that say it?
Well, when I first started Inspire, I was fundamentally against quotas. I thought it was the most awful idea that you could ever imagine, because I'd gone through my career and I'd just gone that way, which was my dad. He taught me to go that way if you want to go that way. But around about sort of 5 years in, I started to realise that it was like pushing a boulder through treacle uphill. If we wanted a parity, or at least an even vaguely decent figure, we're going to have to do something.
Yeah.
So, whilst I would always say that I would want the best person for the job, you can do many things. You can change the job. You can change the spec. You can change the candidate spec. Just because you had a John before doesn't mean to say that you need to replace them with another John. You can change it. So when people say, "Oh, we couldn't find any women for the job," well, you can find a woman and you can flex the job. So I have a different conversation with people, and I think that there's a whole thing about the language that you use in a job advert, for example, or even the job spec will put women off, for example. Change the wording, change the language. If you are really committed to actually getting women on your teams or boards or exec teams, you can do it.
Yeah.
Simple as that, you can do it. You just have to be more mindful and more creative in the way that you do it. And actually be brave enough to take a perceived risk, though why on earth they would think it would be risky to have women on board, I don't know. That's a whole different conversation over a glass of wine. But in terms of positive discrimination, I just see it in a different way. I see it as being more creative, not discrimination, because what last year on International Women's Day, which is now International Women's Week, it's one of my busiest weeks in the whole year, and I got trolled by a guy, and on Twitter, and he said, "When's International Man's Day then?" And to which I said, "Well, you could say 364 other days of the year, but actually, if you really want to be pedantic, there is a particular day for you in November, which there is an official International Man's Day." For me, it's more important to create an environment where we can work together, because if you actually put women and men together, you get a stronger team.
Definitely, yeah.
So I'm not about. I mean, if you wanted to make it official. If you wanted quotas, then maybe you could have it for a fixed period of time. So you could have it for 2 parliaments, for example, to get more women, to normalise it.
Yeah.
Because it's a bit like the smoking ban. Everybody thought that the whole restaurant and pub trade would close and everything would fall over. But no, all of us have got very used to not having smoky environments in a pub.
Yeah.
And now it's normal. So if you smell somebody smoking, it's like, ew. So and I do believe that if you normalised it, if you got it to be normal, then people wouldn't chunt us so much. So maybe we do need it. But in terms of one by one, positive discrimination for me is being more creative.
Definitely, yeah, I definitely agree. Even when people are hiring people, their definition of it's like what you said, where men and women have different traits as a boss as well. So if you widen your definition of what a boss is, because usually when we think of what a leader is, it's usually really one-track minded, where they have to be assertive, they have to be this, they have to be that. But if we broaden it, and we could also say, like, leaders are good listeners, they get more people involved, which has been, like, statistically found what women leaders do more as well. That's how we can shift more people into these roles, more women into these roles as well. So it's like what you said, it's basically about broadening what your definition is, maybe changing the job spec and wording it a different way so it includes more people as well. So yeah, I completely agree with that. And also my final question is there anything we as individuals can do to improve the diversity and inclusion of our workplace? Because we've talked a lot about what managers can do and what all these big superiors can do, but what can we do as individuals to make sure that our company or where we work or our workplace is more inclusive?
Well, I mean, as I said before, as an individual, you have a responsibility for your own destiny. And if you want to work somewhere that makes you miserable, well, then that's your choice. But if you, if you do start to talk or start to understand what inclusion means, and start to even get a better perception of what life is like through somebody else's lens, then it will make you a better person. And I think I don't know why people find that so hard to understand. And I think that everybody's responsibility is to open their eyes. It's not all about me. It's not the sense of self is very high at the moment, and I think people need to broaden out to go, okay, well, even if they only did it for one other person in their group, to understand what Ramadan meant, for example, or just something like that, so that next year you can be a bit more mindful of somebody that somebody's fasting during the day, for example. So don't ask them if they want a coffee, because they can't have one. It's simple as that. So that the level of understanding about inclusion increases, and I think that one of the best things that organisations can do is to have bite-sized chunk sessions on all sorts of different subjects, so that they can increase the knowledge base for individuals. And one, for example, I did a set of podcasts, and one of the most popular ones was with a lady all about transitioning as transgender, and I got so many questions from people afterwards, and it sort of opened a box, and people who had been frightened to ask before asked all sorts of questions. And if you can do that, then you'll create a better working environment, because people won't spend so much time covering themselves and cloaking themselves to become this work persona. They'll just bring themselves to work, and surely that's a better state to be in than pretending to be someone you're not.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for your time. Is there anything that you would like to add, or anything you would want to even ask me, or?
Not really. I think the main thing for me is keep doing what you're doing.
Oh, thank you.
And keep having a voice, and keep talking about it, because at the end of the day, if we can, I call it my little steps campaign. If we convert people one by one, and they convert one by one, then we'll get somewhere.
Definitely. Thank you so much for being here, and that's the end of the podcast.